Okay, I wanted to talk about how language gets set on the site and how we use translations. So there are three places where the language gets set, either on initial page load, or we have our language selectors here at the top of the page and at the bottom of the page here. So when the app loads, we in our app.js we do some initialization to figure out what kind of information we already have on the user's language preference. So that can mean we are going to read it from the URL. So we have something like /fr here, or we could change that to be ES, which is Spanish, and then we basically read those two letters and the entire site is now in Spanish. We also have cookies that we read, so this language pref cookie is now set to Spanish, so every time that the user comes back to the site, it would be in Spanish until they change the language otherwise. And if none of those options are true, then we are using the language default here, which is English. We also set the currency on page load, which is important. And so we read these cookies and then we initialize the language and currency in our translation store. So we have a global store translations, which has information on a user's locale, a user's language, and their currency preferences. So if I come here and I look at our initialized language and currency function, it's doing a couple different things. So it's setting the language, which basically just fires the action and sets our language. It also sets our currency, and there's some routes on the site that very much need to have this two-letter language designation. So like there's some hotel pages that have to have it. I think the Taba Plus page has to have it. Some of them don't. It all gets configured in the reducer. So we have a routing store here with all of our different routes, and some of them we need to prepend the language and some of them we don't. So that's all that action is doing. That's basically how we set the language on the site. Just we set the language on the site in two places, which is probably less than ideal, but that's how it is. So we are setting the language with our own Redux store. So that's what happens when the page loads. So again, I'm in app.js, I'm initializing the language, I'm going out and I'm setting the language in our Redux store, and then I'm also registering the language with our i18n library, which is the library that we use to manage our translations. So if you notice in our source directory here, we have an i18.js file, and that holds all the configurations for our translation. So this is a config file here, and it's doing some configuration stuff here, and it's also most importantly pointing our translation files to the appropriate language, so that when we set the site to be in Spanish, it knows to use these translation Spanish files, which are being imported from our translation JSON right here. So this is a Spanish one. So we have, these are our newer translations, which are namespaced by page and element and the description. We have some legacy key name values, which are a little less organized, but they all exist in this translation JSON file for any translations that are being done on the React side of things. Okay, so once the language gets globally set, how are we actually implementing that? And that's going to be done in our translate component which I'm going to talk to you about a little bit in the next video.